The first echoes of conflict. The UES Arcadia was humanity's pride, a marvel of engineering designed to explore the uncharted edges of the galaxy. Commander Area Valen stood at the helm, staring into the black abyss of space. The ship's engines hummed with the familiar, reassuring rhythm, but the unease that gripped her heart was anything but familiar. Ahead of them, in the cold emptiness of space, loomed an alien ship. It was enormous, half the size of the moon. And it didn't look like anything humanity had ever seen. The vessel's surface shimmered like liquid glass, an otherworldly iridescence that seemed to absorb and reflect light in strange, hypnotic patterns. Its presence sent a shockwave through the fabric of space itself. Aria's hand hovered over the control panel, her fingers poised to make a command. But no command was necessary. The ship, as if aware of their presence, initiated a transmission. On the view screen, an image of an alien appeared, a tall, humanoid figure, its skin translucent, veins glowing with an eerie, soft blue light. The being's eyes, an unsettling mixture of multiple pupils stacked within each socket, blinked in perfect unison. "Commander Area Valen of the United Earth Federation," the alien said, its voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. It spoke in a language that immediately translated in their ears, as if the Arcadia's systems had been prepared for this moment. "We are the Anaxians. We have come to extend an offer, or if you choose to decline, a warning." Aria's mind raced. She had been a soldier, a leader, and a strategist, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this moment. Contact with an alien species, let alone one that arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system, without any prior signals, was an event no one had anticipated. And yet here they were. She turned to Lieutenant Hayes, her second in command, who had already begun running analysis on the alien vessel's structure and energy readings. "What do we know?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying the underlying weight of 100 unknowns. "Commander," Hayes said, his voice tight, "their ship's energy signature is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's not just a ship, it seems to be more. Alive, somehow. And its propulsion system, it doesn't follow any known laws of physics." He paused, his gaze fixed on the readings that were flashing on his console. "It's as if they've manipulated space itself to move. It's beyond us." Aria's mind flashed to the briefings, to the many theories about alien encounters, about the possibility of war or peace, but none of them prepared her for this. The Anaxians had made contact, and in their voice was a promise, or perhaps a threat, that humanity could not ignore. The alien figure on the screen tilted its head slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You have heard our offer," it said. "We offer integration. Join us, and your species will benefit from the knowledge and power of the Anaxian collective. Your resources will be at our disposal, your civilization advanced beyond what your primitive minds can imagine. Submit, and your future is secure." The words hung in the air like a heavy mist. The offer seemed too good to be true. Humanity, united but fractured, was still reeling from its own struggles. War, poverty, disease, and climate change had nearly torn them apart. And now, here they were being offered salvation at the hands of an alien race whose technology and power dwarfed their own. But there was something in Aria's gut that told her this wasn't salvation. It was control. She straightened her posture, gathering her thoughts. "We respectfully decline," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Humanity will not be integrated. We have fought too hard, struggled too much, to be subjugated now." The Anaxian's multiple eyes blinked in perfect unison, a ripple of surprise passing through its otherwise calm demeanor. "You decline." The tone was laced with disbelief. "Your species is unprepared for the consequences of such a decision. You will regret this." Aria could feel the weight of the alien's words, but she refused to let fear take hold. "We are not afraid," she said firmly. "We may be small, but we have something you don't understand. We have something far more powerful than technology. We have the will to fight." and we will not yield. The transmission abruptly ended, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. For a moment, no one on the bridge moved. It was as though the entire universe had frozen in place. Then Lieutenant Hayes spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, they're powering up their weapons." Aria felt her pulse quicken. She had expected a response, but not so quickly. Her mind raced, weighing her options. Humanity was outgunned, outmatched, and vastly outnumbered by the Anaxians. But in that moment, Aria knew one thing: they had underestimated humanity. She glanced at her tactical officer, Captain John Marshall. "Prepare to deploy all defensive systems. Get the fleet on standby, and send word to Earth Command. The war has begun." Aria's fingers hovered above the control panel. She could feel the weight of the moment, of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. This was no longer just a mission. This was the beginning of something far greater, something humanity could not afford to lose. In the vast expanse of space, the Arcadia held its ground, its crew ready to face the storm that was about to come. This beginning sets up a tense, mysterious encounter with a technologically superior alien race, while highlighting humanity's determination and resilience. It introduces a strong and capable protagonist in Commander Aria Valen, and establishes the conflict that will drive the story forward. The brink of war. The UES Arcadia shuddered as its engines ignited, the massive ship now aligning with Earth's defensive perimeter. Aria Valen stood before the strategic display, her hands clasped behind her back. The vastness of space outside the window seemed to mock the uncertainty within the ship's walls. The alien fleet, the Anaxians, as they had called themselves, hadn't moved since their transmission ended. But Aria knew better than to take that as a sign of retreat. "We're not dealing with diplomats, Commander," said Lieutenant Hayes, his voice filled with frustration as he scanned the data. "They didn't come here to talk. They came to conquer." Aria turned toward him, her face set in a mask of grim determination. "Then let them come." The crew around her was tense, their eyes darting between consoles, awaiting the inevitable. The Arcadia's defense systems were formidable: cutting-edge railguns, ion shields, and antimatter warheads. But they were nothing compared to the might of the Anaxian fleet, which had already demonstrated the ability to manipulate space itself. "Commander," Captain Marshall spoke up from the tactical console, "we've detected more ships. The Anaxian fleet is moving toward us. At least 30 ships, with more emerging from the rift in space every minute. They're organizing for something big." Aria narrowed her eyes, studying the display. The ships didn't just look different, they seemed to distort the space around them, as if they existed outside the normal rules of physics. The shimmering, crystalline forms reflected light in ways that made them look like strange constellations scattered across the inky void. "They're preparing a strike," she said, her voice firm. "A full-scale assault. They won't waste time negotiating." Hayes nodded, his fingers flying across the console. "Commander, we've tried to scan their weaponry, but it's like they're shielding everything. Our scans come back as empty. We don't know what we're up against." Aria's mind raced. The Anaxians were hiding their weapons behind some kind of cloaking field, one that could render their arsenal completely invisible to their technology. It was both brilliant and terrifying. But as the tension on the bridge escalated, something unexpected happened. The low rumble vibrated through the ship's hull, an ominous tremor that made every officer on board stiffen. Aria felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as the Arcadia began to drift sideways in a subtle but unrelenting pull. The artificial gravity flickered for a brief moment before stabilizing. "Report," Aria snapped. "We're being pulled," Lieutenant Park said, his voice edged with disbelief. "The Anaxian fleet isn't firing. They're creating some kind of gravitational anomaly. It's warping the fabric of space around us." The word struck Aria like a blow. This was no ordinary weapon. The Anaxians were manipulating the very nature of space itself, something far beyond what humanity had ever achieved. It wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge. "Damn it," Arya muttered under her breath. She knew they couldn't survive in this kind of pull for long. A ship this size would be torn apart by gravitational forces stronger than anything Earth had ever experienced. Her mind raced, searching for a way to counteract it. A sudden, unanticipated voice broke through the tension. "Commander, I have an idea." Arya turned to face Ensign Sarah Juno, the Arcadia's chief engineer. The young woman had always been an underdog, a quiet genius who rarely spoke up unless she had something big to say. But when she did speak, it was always worth listening to. "Ensign?" Arya asked, raising an eyebrow. Juno was already pulling up a series of complex equations and simulations on the screen. "We can't fight the gravitational anomaly directly, but we can use it. The Anaxians are using it as a weapon to destabilize our position, but they've left an opening." "Explain." "Gravitational forces like this are a two-way street," Juno continued, her eyes lighting up with the fire of her discovery. "If we create a counterforce, a localized space-time distortion of our own, we can generate an equal but opposite pull. We won't be able to neutralize their field completely, but we can redirect it." Arya's mind raced as she processed the information. It was risky, more than risky, but it was the only shot they had. If the Anaxians could bend space, perhaps humanity could do the same. "How long will it take?" Arya asked, her gaze fixed on Juno. "Less than 5 minutes, if I can reroute enough power from our reactors," Juno replied, already moving toward the ship's engineering panel. Arya turned to Captain Marshall, who had been listening intently. "Get the fleet into position. We need to buy her time." Marshall nodded. "Understood. We'll position ourselves to defend the Arcadia as best we can. But Commander, if we fail..." Arya turned back to face the view screen, where the shimmering Anaxian ships were now on the move. They were drawing closer, their gravity fields pulling the Arcadia further toward the center of their fleet. There was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. If they failed now, it would mean the end of Earth's fight for survival. "We won't fail," Arya said firmly. "I'm not going to let that happen." As Juno raced toward engineering, Arya moved to the command chair, her eyes scanning the bridge. Every officer aboard the Arcadia was focused, their expressions set in determined lines. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It wasn't their weapons, their ships, or even their knowledge of the universe that made them strong. It was their ability to adapt, to improvise, and to never give up. For the first time in history, humanity was fighting a war not just for survival, but for the future of the entire galaxy. Arya Valen wasn't about to let that slip away. The will to adapt. Time was running out. The UES Arcadia's hull groaned under the strain of the Anaxian gravitational pull. Commander Arya Valen watched with cold intensity as the ship was slowly dragged toward the heart of the alien fleet, the force of it threatening to tear apart everything they had worked for. In front of her, the view screen flickered with static, and then a sudden surge of light flashed across the blackness of space. The Anaxian ships were closing in fast, their presence an overwhelming wall of energy and sheer technological might. Arya could feel her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic was not an option. "Ensign Juno, status report." She called out, her voice steady, though inside her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had placed her trust in the young engineer's hands, and now that trust was all that stood between humanity and annihilation. "We're almost ready," Juno's voice crackled through the comms. "I've rerouted power to the distortion field generator, but we're still siphoning energy from the secondary reactors. We need just a little more time." A violent tremor shook the Arcadia, followed by a deafening crackle of energy across the ship's communications array. The lights flickered briefly, casting the bridge into momentary darkness. "Commander, they're accelerating their approach," Lieutenant Hayes shouted. "They're locking on our coordinates. They're going to open fire." Arya's stomach tightened. The Anaxians had no intention of waiting any longer. They were about to unleash their weapons, and she could only guess how devastating they might be. In that moment, she knew one thing. They had to make a move before the Arcadia was reduced to scrap. "Captain Marshall," she barked, her voice sharp with authority. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. Get us out of their line of sight. I don't care if we scrape the edge of a black hole. We need to buy Juno more time." Marshall didn't hesitate. "On it, Commander," he shouted, his hands flying across the controls. The Arcadia lurched violently as it veered off course, the powerful thrusters roaring to life as the ship fought against the gravitational pull. A streak of blue light flashed across the bridge windows as the alien fleet loomed dangerously close, their ships like massive, geometric shadows hovering in space. "Get ready," Aria muttered under her breath, her fingers curled tightly around the armrests of her chair. The universe outside was an endless expanse, but within the Arcadia, time felt like it was stretching to its breaking point. "Commander, I've got it." Ensign Juno's voice rang through the comms with a note of triumph. "Distortion field is online. Priming the counterforce now. We're about to shift the gravitational anomaly." Aria's heart leaped. It was a risky move, and they had no way of knowing if it would even work. The Anaxians were manipulating space itself. Could they match that kind of power? She glanced at the tactical display. The Anaxian ships were preparing to fire. A stream of light shot out from one of their vessels, aimed directly at the Arcadia. The Arcadia shuddered as the first volley of energy blasts crackled through space, but just as the deadly beam was about to hit, something incredible happened. A ripple in space, a distortion of light and gravity, erupted around the Arcadia. The ship jolted sideways as the counterforce took effect, sending a shockwave through the fabric of space itself. "Brace for impact," Aria yelled, gripping the console with white-knuckled force. The Arcadia rocked violently, its engines groaning under the strain of both the gravitational anomaly and the counterforce. The energy from the Anaxian blast crashed against the invisible shield they had created, scattering harmlessly into space. It was as if the entire universe had taken a deep breath and held it. "Did it work?" Hayes asked, his eyes wide as he checked the systems. Aria could feel her breath catch in her throat. The Arcadia had survived the first barrage. But the battle was far from over. "Not yet," she said, her voice grim. "They'll adapt. They always do." Indeed, Aria could see the Anaxians regrouping on the tactical display. Their ships weren't retreating. They were recalibrating their weapons, adjusting their strategy. They had expected humanity to crumble beneath their overwhelming might. But now, for the first time, the Arcadia had managed to turn the tables. A fleeting victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Commander," Captain Marshall called from the helm, his voice strained. "We've got incoming. They've altered their approach. They're using a different form of energy. It's not a weapon. It's a field." "Another field?" Aria asked, a flash of frustration crossing her face. The Anaxians had clearly been testing humanity's limits, and now it seemed they were shifting to a new strategy, one that could bypass their defenses completely. The Anaxian ships began to emit pulses of energy that twisted the space around them, forming a massive web of light. It wasn't an attack. It was a containment field, designed to trap the Arcadia within it. The web spread out like a net, closing in on their position. "Shields up," Aria ordered, her voice steady despite the tension building in her chest. "Prepare for the worst. Evade if you can, but hold position if necessary. We need to keep their focus on us while Ensign Juno finishes her work." In the distance, the Arcadia could see the shimmer of the Anaxian fleet's approach, their massive ships moving with eerie precision. The web of energy was closing in fast, and Aria knew they had only moments left. She could feel the weight of every decision she had made, every command she had issued. They were playing a dangerous game. "Ensign," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "How close are we?" "We're there, Commander," Juno's voice crackled through the comms, filled with urgency. I'm initiating the final phase now. It'll create a singularity-like counterforce, enough to break their field, but it'll drain all our power. Arya exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Do it. Seconds passed like hours. The field stretched closer. The energy around them intensified. And then, a brilliant explosion of light erupted from the Arcadia. For a split second, it felt as if the entire universe had folded in on itself. The gravitational field shattered. The web of energy collapsed. The Anaxians, momentarily disoriented, had lost their edge. The Arcadia was free. But the cost had been immense. Full power restored. Juno shouted triumphantly, her voice full of relief. The counterfield worked, Commander. The web is gone. Arya exhaled, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. They had survived. But this war was far from over. The Anaxians would come again, stronger, smarter, and deadlier. And humanity's fight had only just begun. The turning point. The Arcadia lurched again, though this time it was a controlled jolt, as though the ship itself was taking a deep breath before plunging back into the chaos. Arya Valen's hands gripped the command chair tighter. The tension was palpable. She could feel it in her bones, the knowledge that they had bought some time, but that every moment was a countdown to something worse. Report, she commanded, her voice sharp, but underneath there was a thread of uncertainty she couldn't entirely suppress. Lieutenant Hayes was quick to respond. The gravitational field has dissipated for now, Commander, but we're not out of danger. The Anaxians are regrouping. They're adjusting their tactics. It's only a matter of time before they... A sudden flash across the tactical display interrupted him. Arya's eyes snapped to the screen as a new cluster of Anaxian ships materialized at the edge of their detection range. These were not the shimmering, crystalline behemoths they had seen before. These were sleek, angular, and menacing, designed for speed and precision. They've evolved, Arya muttered under her breath, but loud enough for the crew to hear. The Anaxians were adapting. They had learned from their previous failure, and now they were preparing for a more coordinated strike. We can't keep dodging like this, Captain Marshall said from the helm, his voice laced with concern. They're too fast, too precise, and with each wave, they're learning more about us. We can't outrun them. Arya exhaled slowly, calculating their options. The Arcadia was a marvel of human ingenuity, but against an alien fleet that could manipulate the very fabric of space-time, it felt like a toy. If they were to survive this, they needed to do something the Anaxians couldn't predict. We need a counterattack, Arya said, her voice steady and commanding. If we keep reacting to their moves, we'll be playing their game. It's time to take the initiative. Hayes raised an eyebrow. A counterattack. Commander, they outnumber us by nearly 10 to 1, and we're running on borrowed power. What do you propose? Arya turned, locking eyes with him. We don't need to match their strength. We need to outthink them. Prepare the quantum disruptors. Get them ready to fire. We're going to break their formation. Marshall looked at her in disbelief. The quantum disruptors. Commander, those are still experimental. We haven't even had a chance to test them under combat conditions. We don't have the luxury of testing anymore, Arya replied sharply. We use what we have, or we don't make it out of this alive. For a long moment, the bridge was silent as the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The quantum disruptors were humanity's most secretive weapon, a last-ditch effort to neutralize the advantages of advanced alien technology. They were designed to interfere with the quantum fields that allowed the Anaxians to manipulate space-time, but they were unstable, untested, and unpredictable. But in the absence of better options, it was all they had. Understood, Hayes said at last, his fingers flying over his console to initiate the sequence. Initiating quantum disruptor charge. We'll need at least 5 minutes to get them fully primed. 5 minutes. 5 minutes was all they had before the Anaxian fleet closed in. Aria's mind was a blur of calculations and possibilities. The Anaxians had outclassed humanity at every turn. Their ships moved like ghosts, bending space to make unpredictable maneuvers. They had weapons that could obliterate planets, and yet it wasn't their strength that made Aria fear the most. It was their confidence. The Anaxians had assumed their superiority would be enough to crush humanity without a fight. But the longer the battle raged, the more Aria realized. It wasn't just the Arcadia they were fighting. It was every human who had ever refused to give up. "Commander," Lieutenant Park interrupted, his voice unusually tense. "We're getting a transmission from the Anaxians." Aria's stomach tightened. She had been expecting this. They had warned humanity once already. Would this be the beginning of their ultimatum? "Put it through," she ordered. The view screen flickered, and a new figure appeared, an Anaxian, but not one like the others. This one was different, its skin glowing in deep shades of violet, its many eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating intelligence. It was an imposing figure, emanating a presence that seemed to fill the entire room, even through the screen. "I am High Commander Lyros of the Anaxian Conclave," the being's voice echoed, smooth and commanding. "Commander Valen, your resistance is futile. Your species is insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy, but we offer you one final chance to submit. Surrender your world. Surrender your fleet, or face total annihilation." A cold wave swept through the bridge. Aria could hear the crew's breaths catch as the weight of the Anaxian words hung in the air. It wasn't just a threat. It was an ultimatum designed to break them. "Commander Lyros," Aria said, her voice steady, betraying none of the fear that gripped her, "I have a different proposal. You leave this system now, or we will show you just how dangerous humanity can be when backed into a corner." There was a moment of silence, the Anaxian eyes narrowing, scrutinizing her. Lyros seemed to consider her words, but his expression remained impassive. "You believe you can win?" Lyros asked, almost with a hint of amusement. "Your technology is primitive, your tactics predictable. You have no chance against us." Aria met his gaze without flinching. "You underestimate us. The Anaxian Empire isn't the first to think that way." She stood, her voice rising, commanding the attention of everyone on the bridge. "You think we will cower. You think we will kneel. But we don't. Humans have never backed down, not when the stakes were the highest. And this time, you're the ones who will learn that lesson the hard way." For a long moment, Lyros said nothing. But then, the transmission abruptly cut off, leaving nothing but the empty blackness of space. Aria's heart pounded in her chest. She had just delivered humanity's final warning. And in that moment, the Arcadia and its crew became the symbol of everything humanity stood for. They would fight, not just to survive, but to prove that no matter how vast the galaxy, no matter how mighty the adversary, humanity would never surrender. "Full power to the quantum disruptors," Aria said, her voice low but resolute. "Let's show them what we can do." As the energy of the Arcadia surged toward the disruptors, the Anaxian fleet moved closer, their ships glinting ominously in the void. The battle was about to reach a new level of intensity. And this time, humanity wasn't just reacting. They were fighting back. The battle unleashed. The Arcadia hummed with energy as Aria Valen stood at the front of the command center, her eyes fixed on the growing mass of Anaxian ships that now filled the view screen. The quantum disruptors were online, their charge building with every passing second. The crew was tense, every person on edge, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the fate of not just the ship, but humanity itself. "Commander," Lieutenant Hayes said, his voice tight with urgency, "we have no more time. The Anaxians are closing in." Aria didn't need to hear the report. She could feel the weight of the impending battle in her bones. Humanity had fought wars before, faced down impossible odds. But nothing like this. The Anaxians, with their vast superiority, were a force unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Yet, in the face of overwhelming darkness, humanity had one thing they could always rely on: creativity. "Initiate the quantum disruptors," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Hayes's fingers flew over the controls, activating the weapons. The ship trembled slightly as the quantum disruptors pulsed to life, sending waves of unstable energy cascading through the fabric of space-time itself. "We're locked on target," he reported, ready to fire. Aria's hand hovered over the command panel, heart racing. If this didn't work, it would be their last stand. But there was no turning back now. The Anaxians needed to learn what humanity was truly capable of. Fire. In an instant, the disruptors unleashed a dazzling wave of energy that rippled outward from the Arcadia, cascading into the heart of the approaching Anaxian fleet. For a moment, nothing happened. The Anaxian ships continued their advance, their sleek forms gliding through space unaffected by the blast. But then, something began to change. The first Anaxian ship shuddered, its hull flickering as though reality itself was being torn apart. Then another, and another. The quantum disruptors had done their work. The carefully controlled space-time manipulation that had allowed the Anaxian ships to bend light and evade attacks began to fracture. "What's happening?" Captain Marshall asked, his voice filled with awe. The Anaxian fleet was not falling apart, but they were now vulnerable. Their once impenetrable shields faltering, their movements less fluid, their weapons misfiring. The Arcadia's disruptors had destabilized the Anaxian quantum field, and the result was chaos. For the first time since the conflict had begun, the Anaxians were in disarray. "Now's our chance," Aria shouted. "All weapons, fire at will." "We'll have to make sure they don't realize until it's too late," Aria said, her eyes never leaving the holographic map. "Send the signal to the decoys. As soon as the Anaxians make their move, we need to be ready." Hayes hesitated but nodded. He knew the stakes. "The Arcadia is ready for the next phase," he confirmed. "Quantum cloaks are online, and we got the electromagnetic pulses primed. The Anaxians won't know what hit them." Aria allowed herself a brief, tight smile. The Arcadia was more than just a warship. It was a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience. The cloaking devices had been a gamble, but they were humanity's last hope of turning the tide. They had already proven once that their weapons could disrupt the Anaxians' advanced technology. Now they were going to use their wits to strike when the enemy least expected it. The decoy strategy. The decoys had been a desperate move. A handful of old Earth warships, decommissioned relics from the early spacefaring years, had been retrofitted with the most basic stealth technology. It was a mock fleet, designed to look like a full-scale human counterattack force. These ships, though slow and poorly armed, were exactly what the Anaxians would expect. To them, they represented the height of human desperation. But the Arcadia was something else entirely. The real strength lay in the Arcadia's ability to mask its true position, disappearing into the vastness of space like a shadow. "Commander," Lieutenant Park said, breaking Aria's thoughts. "The Anaxian flagship is on the move. They've detected the decoys. It's happening. The trap is set." Aria's heart skipped a beat. This was it. She gave one last, long look at the hologram of the Anaxian fleet. It was far larger than anything humanity had ever faced. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered now was how humanity would respond. "Activate the cloaking systems. Full stealth mode." The Arcadia's advanced cloaking system hummed to life, and the ship became invisible to all external sensors. Aria felt a brief pang of anxiety. Cloaking technology was still experimental, but there was no choice now. With a deep breath, she turned to face her crew. "Prepare yourselves," she said. "We've done everything we can to stack the odds in our favor. Now we fight. When the time comes, we strike. A moment of reckoning." High Commander Lyros was furious. His fleet had been deceived by the human decoys, and now his forces were scattered. Unsure of what to target next, he had underestimated humanity once, and now, once again, they had outsmarted him. His many eyes blinked in rapid succession as he watched his fleet struggle to regroup. "Get those ships into formation," he ordered sharply. "We will not be made a fool of again." But even as he gave the command, there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a sense of unease that refused to go away. He couldn't shake the thought. What if humanity was not as weak as he had assumed? What if they had more hidden tricks up their sleeve? Lyros's science officer, Nera, spoke hesitantly, her skin flickering with nervous patterns of thought. "Commander, we have a problem. Our scans, something's blocking our sensors. We can't get a clear reading of the area. And I'm detecting unusual energy readings near the human decoys. Could it be another trap?" Lyros clenched his mandibles. The humans had already proven they could surprise him. Was this another trick? Another bluff? Or was it something far more dangerous? The surprise attack. Back on the Arcadia, Aria stood motionless, staring at the large tactical screen. Time felt like it had slowed to a crawl. Every second that passed meant the Anaxians were drawing closer to the decoy fleet. The tension in the command center was palpable, with every crew member on edge. "Lieutenant Park," Aria said, her voice cold and focused. "How much longer until we can strike?" Park ran his fingers over the holographic controls, eyes darting between screens. "We're in position, Commander. The Anaxians are fully engaged with the decoys. They're falling right into our trap." "Then let's make sure they don't leave with any doubt," Aria replied, her voice hardening. She turned to her crew, giving them a single commanding nod. "Initiate the EMP burst." The Arcadia's cannons lit up, firing in rapid succession at the vulnerable Anaxian ships. The energy blasts tore through their hulls, causing explosions that sent shockwaves rippling through space. The crew cheered, but Aria didn't join them. She knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Anaxians would regroup, adapt, and retaliate. This battle was far from over. But at that moment, they had done the impossible. They had struck a blow, one that had shattered the Anaxians' overconfidence. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back and winning. "Incoming transmission," Lieutenant Park announced, breaking through Aria's thoughts. "It's from the Anaxian flagship." Aria glanced at him, an eyebrow raised. "Put it through." The screen flickered once more, and the familiar face of High Commander Lyros appeared. But this time, there was no arrogance, no cold superiority. His eyes, those countless iridescent orbs, glowed with something else. Uncertainty. "You've damaged our fleet," Lyros said, his voice measured, but tinged with frustration. "This should not have happened. We warned you," Aria interrupted, her voice firm. "You underestimated us. This isn't just a war for survival. It's a war for our future, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect it." For a moment, the two leaders locked eyes. There was something in Lyros's gaze that shifted, a flicker of something approaching respect. Or was it fear? I am not used to being challenged," Lyros said, his voice colder now. "But you have made a grave mistake, Commander Valen. You've drawn the line, and now you will face the full force of the Anaxian conclave." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only the quiet hum of the Arcadia systems. The crew stood silent, each one of them processing the weight of what had just transpired. They had achieved the impossible, but the war was far from won. If anything, the stakes had only grown higher. "Commander," Hayes said, his voice tinged with concern, "they're regrouping. The Anaxians are converging on our position. They'd brought in reinforcements." Aria's eyes flicked to the tactical display. The numbers were overwhelming, but then her gaze shifted, and her mind began to spin with possibilities. The Anaxians had learned one lesson. Their superiority meant nothing when they couldn't predict their enemies. Now, it was time to use that to their advantage. "Lieutenant," Aria said, her voice cold and calculating. It's time to give them a new surprise. She turned to the rest of the crew. Prepare the Arcadia for a tactical retreat. We're going to draw them into a trap. The room went quiet as the crew processed the order. A retreat? After everything they'd just accomplished? Commander, Marshall said, his voice skeptical. We've got them on the ropes. Why pull back now? Arya fixed him with a steely gaze. Because we don't win wars by playing the enemy's game. We win by forcing them into ours. And right now, they think they've got us cornered. We're going to make them regret that. As the crew worked to execute her orders, Arya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. The Arcadia wasn't just going to survive this battle. They were going to make the Anaxians pay for every moment of arrogance they had shown. The time for defense was over. It was time to take the fight to them. The trap is set. The Arcadia's engines thrummed with a steady hum, a comforting sound in the midst of a war that felt like it might tear the universe apart. But Commander Arya Valen didn't feel comfort. Not now. She was focused on something far more pressing. She stood before the war table in the strategy room, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the holographic display, watching as the positions of the Anaxian fleet shifted. Lieutenant Hayes, confirm the status of the decoy fleet, she said, her voice low and controlled. Hayes, standing to her right, didn't take his eyes off the display. Decoy ships are in position, Commander. They're holding course. But I don't like it. The Anaxians are smarter than we thought. If they catch on, they'll turn this into a slaughter. Arya didn't respond immediately. She knew the risk. The decoys were only a partial solution. They were fragile. Their success depended on the Anaxians' failure to see through the ruse. Humanity had only one chance to pull this off, and one misstep could mean disaster. The Arcadia's weapons systems hummed to life. As the Anaxian fleet became distracted by the decoys, the Arcadia unleashed its electromagnetic pulse, disrupting the Anaxian ship's communication systems. The shockwave rippled through space like a tidal wave, causing their ships to falter, their movements jerky and erratic. For a moment, the Anaxians were blind. Now was the time. The Arcadia, still cloaked, moved swiftly into the heart of the Anaxian fleet. The decoys, already on the verge of being destroyed, continued to serve their purpose, drawing fire and attention away from the Arcadia. Fire the primary weapons, Arya commanded. The ship's advanced quantum cannons opened fire in quick succession, sending beams of concentrated energy ripping through the gaps in the Anaxian fleet's formation. One by one, ships that had once been impervious to human weapons began to fall. The Anaxians were caught off guard, unable to react in time. The tide of the battle was shifting. The aftermath. For Arya, there was no time to celebrate. She knew this victory, if it could even be called that, was only a temporary advantage. The Anaxians were smart. They would regroup, learn from their mistakes. But humanity had just proven something they had never doubted. They would never give up. They would never be crushed under the weight of their enemy's arrogance. The Arcadia's crew had outwitted a superior foe, and the battle was far from over. But one thing was certain. This war, this fight for humanity's future, had only just begun.